Where am I at now? It's
68.
just one moment. This is 10.1. This is on page 68, back into the regular agenda, page 68 on for our health and safety report. And we've got Stu Brown.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll take the report as read and take you through a few of the key points that I've picked up in that for you. You'll go through there and you'll see that WorkSafe have announced that they're going to look at their strategy for progress in health and safety, and they've broken that into 3 key areas of engage, enforce and permit. So we're keeping a close eye on that, and we'll bring any changes that are happening in that space back to you. And as we move through, you'll see there's also a reform of the health and safety laws and regulations happening there, and that's really about simplification of it so that it's easier to process for organisations. So that'll be good. We move through into the statistics and the reporting data, and you'll see that we've had 22 incidents reported in April. 10 were events and 6 were injuries and 6 near misses. And as we progress through then into the legislative compliance, we're currently working on 3 of the critical risks. So we've got working groups pulled together that are reviewing the risk statements and the documentation for working around water, threats of aggression and violence, and vehicle crashes. And once that's complete, there'll be another review and a relook at the risk score, and any changes that need to be made will be included in the reports moving forward. And you'll see in the sick leave section in 28 that we've had reasonably sustained higher levels of sick leave across the organisation, and that aligns with the national flu tracker data that we've been getting. So that's something that we're seeing across New Zealand. Chris has put out in his Corrie to all staff, just notifying them that we're aware of this, and he's advised on precautions that staff can take, and also that the rat tests continue to be available for anybody that should want to use them. And we're obviously advising people if they feel unwell to stay home. As we move through, you'll see there's a piece around the director of RTC and the action that's been going on there in relation to transport and work with Kinetic. And there's a lot of actions that have been happening in that space. Obviously, it's something that we've been reviewing for the last year or so, and we're keen to look at working with them to ensure that driver and public safety is of key concern for us. So there's quite a lot of actions there that are happening, and this week I've also connected with them and actually requested their metrics on the assaults, so the numbers of assaults and what the makeup is, what the reasons are behind that. So Phil and I are working closely together on that to see how we can support. And I guess one last thing that's not in the report, but I thought it might be of interest for you. You'll remember back in February that I brought, I think it would have been maybe in the March-April report, we had an incident with a contractor where there was an issue of poles falling over and potential serious injury that was reported to WorkSafe, and we got a commitment for how we had addressed that and investigated and worked with the contractor to resolve the issues. I just wanted to let you know that we have continued on the journey. ICM have done a fantastic job working with the contractor and the directors of that organisation. Unfortunately, there have been a couple more incidents since then, and we have worked with the team and the contractor, and we actually ended up putting a full-time resource in health and safety onto that site to ensure that we're fully across it and ensuring people's safety. So it was just to let you know that these things come up, and we report on them, but they're not forgotten, and we continue to concentrate and work through on them.
Thank you for that. Just to mention, as you brought up our work with Kinetic, it was a real privilege to be able to attend their inaugural bus driver recognition awards last week, and to hear directly from the reports that come through from members of the public in support of the terrific assistance, the aid that drivers extend to our passengers across the Waikato region. It was really lovely to be able to see that and participate in the recognition of the hard work that those people do, sometimes in the face of all sorts of like you say, some various challenges. And so it was nice to be a part of that. All right, I've got Councillor Nicol and then Councillor Downard. Councillor Nicol.
Cool, thanks. Oh, I picked up on a funny spelling thing, and that was that in paragraph 38 you had counsellor instead of counsellor, because it talks about believing the person will benefit from longer term support. So just thought I'd pick that up.
Thank you.
I wouldn't want to advise. The only other ones I saw in your table after paragraph 21, kind of the top 6 injuries by trending category. And I saw concussion mentioned in there, and just thinking about how that's quite serious and the awareness now is much higher on that. You feeling comfortable that the 4 things, root causes that led to that are really well covered? Hate to see more concussion in future, kind of.
Yeah, yeah.
Cuts and stuff is
That's
different.
right. That's right. No, we are across those all and fully investigated, and we're confident with how we're dealing with that. So
Awesome.
thank you.
And then the last one was paragraph 23, mentioned about someone falling on our very large stairs. It just reminded me that when I was in Fonterra's rather intense health and safety culture, there was like in the culture quite some pressure to always, I don't know if this person used the handrail, but to hold on to a handrail whenever you were on stairs anywhere. And so, you know, if there was a leader around site who saw you not using the handrail, it was like something they mentioned. And so it's just stuff like that. I realise is like the high level of culture that you might be working towards.
That's right. That's right. And we did go out following that, you know, reminding people of the 3 points of contact as they go up and down the stairs. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, thank you.
But it's a step from like knowing it and getting trained into like having people like comment on it.
That's right. It's a cultural thing. Yeah.
Thanks.
Councillor Downard.
Yeah, thanks, Stu, for your report. Just noticed in your conclusion, paragraph 41, you talked about the health and safety team encouraging staff to report accidents. Near misses would be good as well, because it, you know, is just as important and, you know, shows staff are proactive or, you know, identifying or potential accidents and stuff like that. So yeah, just wondered how, have you got a register for the near misses as well?
Yeah, we do. That's a great point. And I see that I think it was out of the 12 this year or this month, sorry, there were 6 that were near misses there. And we're pleased to see that that's improved. It can always be more, and it's something that we're talking to the health and safety reps about. And, you know, kind of it's about the cultural side of things, you know, that people feel comfortable recognizing when it's not just an incident that's happened involving an injury, but something that is a near miss. We're keen to hear about those so we can address them. So yeah, it's a great point.
If I could just add, thanks for that comment, Councillor Downard, because actually reporting near misses is as important as reporting incidents. So we get the learnings of how we try and prevent injuries. So I just appreciate the comment.
Yeah.
Councillor Marr.
Yes, Stu, has there been any update on the WorkSafe prosecution of the ports of Auckland and the CE?
I haven't got that, but I can come back to you on it.
Yeah, I just wondered if what the findings might have been. Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Smith.
In relation to your sick leave, my understanding is sick leave has been quite generous across the country with COVID, and that was to be suspended at some stage around about 1st of July, or it may have already happened. What is the organisation's attitude towards that sick leave with the likes of COVID going forward? Because people have a finite number of sick leave days, and through no fault of their own, such as getting in a car with a colleague and spending the day with them and ending up with it. You know, it's not their fault, so to speak. So what's the attitude of the organisation to sick leave in that situation?
Yeah, so we've got a great culture around sick leave, I would say. You know, we do follow the legislation and the government advice around when we had COVID.
That's only the minimum.
Yeah, that's right.
An organisation can enhance that.
That's right. We do have generous sick leave at 10 days, plus we have a sick leave bank, which we constantly, you know, every year that comes out and people submit to that. And we do support a number of people across the organisation to use that when they need to. So we're quite conscious of that.
Nice. Any other, sorry? Oh, we've got a mover in Councillor Marr, a second in Councillor, oh, sorry, Councillor Downard. It was a mover in Councillor Downard. Councillor Marr, would you like to second?
I'd love to.
Oh, awesome. Great. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Thank you.
Great. Hey, thank you, Stu. Much appreciated. It would be good to get that update on the Ports of Auckland. I think considering that our chief executive is the PCBU as opposed to councillors themselves. So really important that councillors remain cognizant of the weight that you bear on your shoulders, Mr. Chief Executive. Okay, we'll go to item 10.2. This is on page 75 of your agenda. The National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management 2020 Implications for Freshwater Policy Review and Confirmation of Forward Project Planning. Tracy, Director May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning, Madam Chair and councillors. The report is self-explanatory. Councillors have had the benefit of this report for a week and a half now. We also held our workshop last week to discuss matters in more detail. I guess just would like to draw councillors' attention to paragraph 4 of the executive summary and paragraphs 23 and 24, which is really just encapsulating the conundrum of we have work to do, we have an ever-moving legislative landscape within to do that, and we also have some responsibilities for prudent investment of our ratepayer funds. We are not singular in the challenge that we are facing. It is faced by all our other regional councils who are all at differing places, I guess, in their freshwater program. The one thing I would like to just mention is our last agenda item today is a submission to the latest round of small changes to the Resource Management Act. It doesn't impact in any way this agenda item. I just wanted to make that very clear, Madam Chair, and that is stated quite clearly in paragraph 15 of the report.
All right. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Kneebone.
Oh, not a question, just thanks, Tracy. That legal, and of course we covered all this last week, but that legal review is quite comprehensive. And I've probably got more to say on this, our submission actually, but I'm happy to move the recommendations, Madam Chair.
All right. We have a mover. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Councillor Nicol. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Director May. Much appreciated. All right, we now move on to item 10.3. This is on page 101 of your agenda. This is the approval of the Waikato Regional Land Transport Plan for 2024 to 2054. Do we have anybody speaking to this? Sorry. I suppose while Phil is making his way, Councillor Downard is the chair of the Regional Transport Committee. Anything that you would like to say to open us up?
Just to the councillors, it was a robust process and had a very full committed committee on discussion, especially with the events that have happened, the weather events, COVID-19 over the last 3 years since the last one was done. We had a new directive come in with Phil and congratulate on him on picking it up and running with it. We weren't too far off with the late GPS and ship that came out, so very pleased that we had a unanimous from the committee to bring it to council for approval. Yeah.
Great. Phil, anything that you would specifically like to highlight for councillors?
Other than my team are in the process of running down the stairs quickly to talk to you about it.
Sorry,
not
we surprised you. We got ahead of schedule.
You're a little ahead.
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's a lot more to add. This has been a complex process in the context of changing government direction. The Regional Transport Committee, from my perspective, has worked hard to understand that complexity and develop a plan that prioritises that regional programme really well, with a focus on resilience and on, interestingly, matters that are outside the urban area has come through really strongly. So a strong Coromandel programme of work, commitment to prioritising Willie Point works in Taupo ahead of national roads of national significance, for example. So it's been a very interesting process, and the committee's worked really hard to prepare this plan. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. And after your jog down the stairs, is there anything you wanted to
Are
add?
you in contact in 3
Nope.
points?
All good. Okay, I've got Councillor Nicol, then Councillor Strange, then Councillor Smith. Councillor Nicol.
Thanks. Yeah, just well done to all the staff that worked on this. As councillors see, it's a massive piece of work. And the councillors and the people who submitted in the hearings, it's really a good effort. I obviously, with my Chair Climate Action hat on, I have a frustration that Phil and Nigel are all too well aware of. We're in a bit of a muddle because we know what we want for the region, and then we have a draft GPS that's going in an opposite direction with it, and we've tried our best, I can see, to merge the two, which has left us in a bit of a muddle in that, you know, we're pushing really hard for that economic development, but we also want to get that emission reduction, and that's actually quite difficult to do two things at the same time. But I think that if the Regional Transport Committee were to get comfortable with that, with those nuances in that going forward, that'll be really good to work through and see how the best can be achieved with that. So overall, yeah, I think you've done really well to explain that conundrum, but there's a bit of work to do to get the outcomes, because otherwise we're just trying to do two things and running in two different directions and not getting there. So yeah, if I could just implore you to get to know that conundrum, figure out how it's going to work with this draft GPS as it turns into a real GPS. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Strange.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I'd just like to echo Chair Councillor Downard's comments about the process and the hard work that the committee put in. But also like to acknowledge staff and the amount of work that they've done over a long period of time to get us to this point as well. As Councillor Downard said, it was a unanimous support from the committee. So yeah, really pleasing result. Acknowledging the tension, as Councillor Nicol has mentioned, between the draft GPS and our regional priorities. I feel we've struck a good balance this time around, and yeah, I'm looking forward to where we go from here. Thank you. Happy to second if Chair Downard is moving in. Thank you.
Great. And I suppose just along those lines, this is where that Carbon Plus framework can help us to achieve some of these goals, And as I understand it, that framework has identified some areas where we can offset the emissions associated with transport. And so there's, I suppose I'm just highlighting that it's nice when we have parallel pieces of work that help us to address some of the conundrums that come up in the pieces of work that come before council. So
I think we've made it clear in the in the RLTP that we are somewhat at the mercy, or almost wholly at the mercy of the funding that comes, and it's great to see the call outs for alternative funding models and all of that being worked through, because we know it's administratively difficult, as well as holding back our aspirations for what the community has said that they want for our region when those two things don't align. So well done on making the best of it. Thanks.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. And I thank the committee for putting this together. I suppose mine's a little bit closer to home in the constituency that I represent. I note from the report, and I read it a little while ago, so I think I remember it's in this report, that State Highway 23, Hamilton to Raglan, its entire length is dangerous and considered high risk. State Highway 39 has also got a high level of risk in certain parts of it. My concern has been that the roundabout proposed at the intersection of State Highway 39 and 23 has made it to LCP 1 unfunded. I'm just wondering, and I can take this offline, but when is that intersection going to be built? We've had deaths on either side of the intersection. We had some idiot go through so fast that he hit a milk tanker coming the other way because he couldn't straighten up, and his death was 100 metres past the intersection quite recently. And we've had other workers, I think Higgins been prosecuted for workers at the moment, just further along the road. So when is that roundabout going to be built so that it can give that community some reassurance? How many people do we have to kill along that road? And that's probably a bit emotional, but having worked on behalf of that community for 17 odd years, it's time to see this funded. So when is it going to be funded, please?
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Smith. You mentioned potentially taking it offline. I can resolve to go back to NZTA and talk with the local area manager to identify where that sits in the program. I'm conscious it has been there for some time, and address, certainly knowing that the State Highway Investment proposal as it is still being considered for funding, but coming back to you on where that is programmed into the forward schedule.
Councillor Downard.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to say thank you to the democracy team, especially Dave, over this process, and LJ just making it a lot more smoother for both the hearings and the committee with agendas and organising the submitters, you know, when we didn't have some turn up and ringing up last minute. So it really made my job a lot more easier by, you know, what Dave did for me during the process of this long-term plan. So thank you very much.
Very good. With that, we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Well done, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we now move to item 10.4, the adoption of the 2024-34 long-term plan. So this is on, this is in the addendum on page 4. Janine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, decision in front of Council today is in relation to the adoption of the 2024-2034 long-term plan. I just really wanted to reflect that this decision represents a culmination of 18 months of work by both elected members and staff to set the priorities, work programs and associated budget for the organisation for at least the next 3 years. The LTP document that's presented reflects the decisions that Council has previously made following consultation on the plan with your community. As staff, we've been working over the last 3 weeks with our auditors to review the content of the document, with this resulting in an unmodified audit opinion being received with an emphasis of matter in relation to Te Huia funding, which is consistent with what had occurred in relation to the consultation document. And we have Clarence Susan, our Audit Director, online for comments at the appropriate time. You will have noted that on your tables, we've provided a schedule of key changes that have been made to the document that was included in your agenda, just for completeness and transparency. We're continuing to work with audit to close out some remaining queries, so they are likely to result in some further minor text changes before publication. But all of the major matters have been resolved. Probably just the other thing to call out in terms of the report, is agreed with Council in May. We've also proposed some wording around an interim remission policy in relation to the primary industry compliance rate. So that would be the basis on which we would administer remissions for the coming 12-month period, with a remission policy proper to be developed for consultation through an amendment to the LTP for 25-26. Thank you. That's all from me. But so we do have Clarence online if
Thank you.
if the chair wants to take any feedback from audit.
Thank you for that, Janine. And I do appreciate the work that staff has put in to development of that criteria for the remissions. I think that was obviously something that was important to council, and I appreciate how that's been responded to. Clarence, did you want to make any comment?
Good morning, Chair and Councillors. Yes, I just want to reiterate that what Janine has said, it's an unmodified audit opinion with the emphasis of matter, which is a really good result. And I just wanted to thank Janine and the team with the way that they worked with us to get to this position. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Clarence. All right, do I have Councillor Smith?
Thank you. On the remissions policy, I'm concerned that whilst it may be consistent with the current policy, the last bullet point, I don't think we discussed at all. It says if the property becomes eligible for any other rates remission from council, for example, remission for biodiversity, the remission of the primary industry compliance rate, which I don't support. However, rate will cease. If it gets to the $376 and the biodiversity remission is only $100, is that fair? And so I would say that it should be no more than or equal to the primary industry rate. So
through the chair, if I can clarify that.
Thank you.
The scope of the biodiversity remission, which includes QE2 covenanting and the like, considers all of the rates charged to the property, whereas this remission is specifically to the primary industry compliance rate only. So the biodiversity remission would take into consideration this rate as part of the total rates that are charged. The intent with that is that we're just not doubling up in terms of the way that we're considering the remissions.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, you've lost your mic.
Yeah, I'm happy with no double dipping, but I don't want it to be penalising because there is a lesser amount from another area. So that's good.
All right. So I've got a mover and Councillor Mahuta. I'm happy to second that. Did you have another comment, Councillor Graf?
I'll just say with regard to this, we went out at 6%, is that right? And then we're now deciding on 7.4, is that right?
Janine, verify those figures.
4%.
So we had the
increase.
draft that we went out with at 6. And then in response to the submissions and the deliberations of council, we've landed at.
And then we've got an 8.8 to
7.4 in year 1.
So through the chair in the report, bullet point 17 and a table that sits underneath that provides the comparison over the first 3 years of the plan between what we went out through consultation with and where the final plan has landed and was those budgets or that impact approved by council at the end of May.
And it's
noting key shift there was around the increase in the Natural Heritage Partnerships program funding.
And so here today, there's no opportunity for us to consider tweaking anything, getting a reduction on that.
All of those motions that were passed in May that made up these figures have all been passed.
Passed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Marr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got two comments, I guess, and a challenge. First off, I'd just like to thank Councillor Hughes. He challenged the team, ELT, and that to look inwards and actually go back to virtually a zero budget. That meant that you looked along projects, you looked along budget lines and stuff like that, and came up with basically just under a $2 million saving. From my recollection. Now, to me, that's nearly a 2% saving in rate. So, and along with the work being done with our investment account and where we're looking at that and improvements being made along those lines, I think there's a couple of positive things that have come out of this long-term plan. So, as Chair of Finance, Chris, I do thank you. Secondly, I'm happy where the natural heritage rate has landed. I know there's some councillors concerned around this, but for me, it is only an extra $10 on top of the $5 that is already being paid by each ratepayer's property. And this is one rate that really just the rubber hits the road for me. There's so many good things being done around the place. I know in my area, certainly in my constituency, there's a hell of a lot of good volunteer groups. There's no added labour in that. You know, we have a tiny little administration cost in that fund. And to me, it's really a bang for buck. My challenge is regional transport. So Councillor Downard, Councillor Strange, that regional rate for transport, we've heard from our TAs that there's some real concern on where that sits. So my challenge to you guys is over the next year, we really need to dig into that. I know it doesn't kick in until the year after, but we really want to find out what our TAs require in those spaces and what really works for them in regional transport. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Good words, Councillor Marr. One question. In the graph on page 6, item 17, you've got the permitted activity monitoring 1.574. My understanding was that the current income essentially would be spread across a smaller group, larger land holdings. Yet I see in the draft, we ended up with 2.6 million, not quite double, and 2.491 in the final. So can someone explain to me, please, why we've reduced the amount of ratepayers, but nearly doubled the figure when I understood that the cost was merely being moved from a large group to a small group? And I'll just make an observation that not too far from me, 2 properties of 2 hectares or more, but less than 5 hectares, one's dumping industrial waste on my boundary. And secondly, another one nearby has got horses being break fed on slopes of around 60%. And below that is a waterway which feeds into the Waipa River. So I just won't accept that properties of 2 hectares to 20 hectares should only be looked at by way of a general rate, but I've lost that argument, so I'll move on. So coming back to my question, why have we nearly doubled the income when I thought we were supposed to be moving it sideways?
Thank you. Thank you. So as I understand it, this is a reflection of the move from the industry.
The primary, yes, so
being
so
part
through,
of general
so
rate,
through the
right?
chair, the permitted activity monitoring rate was solely for those activities under the permitted activity rules that we were monitoring. That was charged to properties 2 hectares and above. The other activity that's come into the primary industry compliance rate is the primary industry engagement activities that to date have been 100% funded through the general rate. So the new rate is a combination of those 2 things, which is why you see the figure being higher with a transfer of some of that funding out of the general rate into that targeted rate. So there've always been those 2 elements to that program that is now funded through the primary industry compliance rate.
Councillor Downard.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'll be asking for division and I'll be voting against this 10-year plan. And that's not to any detriment to the staff. I think the staff, out of all the workshops and the deliberations coming up for the draft plan, they listened to all the concerns of the councillors and came out with a 6%. I'm not happy that we've gone up to 7.4% through the deliberations and gone outside that. I owe it to my ratepayers that can't afford these ongoing rate rises. I know there is a balance between what we want to do in the community, and I did support biosecurity and biodiversity and the heritage rate. But then I did ask councillors through deliberations that would they be happy with what the staff recommended at the $8.68, which would bring down the rates into that 6% range. And unfortunately, I lost that call. So yeah, I'd just like to reiterate that I'm pleased with all the hard work that the staff done with this long-term plan, but I feel it's my responsibility, the ratepayers, to vote against this. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to thank Councillor Marr for his kind words. Unfortunately, I can't take too much responsibility. It's the staff that have done all the hard work on this, and I'd like to, like the other councillors around the table, like to thank them for what they've done over the last 18 months. I know it's been a challenge for you, in particular, Janine. So I do appreciate the effort that's been put in and what you've delivered. However, we know that our current inflation rates are now below 3%, according to the latest statistics. I, like fellow councillors, were happy with a 6% we could live with that because of the impact of depreciation, and that is another discussion I'm going to have with Janine at another time, because that has a significant negative impact on the rural community, which effectively is inflating the total rate which we're looking at in front of us. So I was prepared to live with 6%. I've had the message given to me quite clearly from constituents that they're not happy that we've gone from what we went out on consultation with to 7.4, and therefore I will be voting against this resolution as well. But that's not a reflection on staff, that's just a reflection on where we sit in the community and where the current level of inflation is. Thank you.
Councillor Kneebone.
Oh, it's just a comment with regards to Noel's concerns, and it will correct me if I get it wrong, but my understanding is, as Janine's pointed out, that PA rate is for specific permitted activities regarding agriculture. There's still a whole bunch of other regional plan rules
Yes.
that we have to enforce that are funded through a different mechanism, and Janine or Ed can probably provide more clarity on that. That still have to be monitored, et cetera, and enforcement action taken as necessary. So I don't see this rate as enabling those properties with 2 hectares to get off, if that makes sense. That's how I understand it. Because I recall asking this question very early on. Yeah.
For me, the issue is that, having done the sums, this paper doesn't reflect reality. It shows an average. And I know, and I've said this in this room before, the impact on me personally is a 20% rate increase on the bottom line. And a lot of the rural community are facing those same increases and or greater. And it's quite honestly, I'm torn as to whether to support this or not, because I think we have not been equitable in our deliberations, and we should have considered a lot more. The reality is we need to put a rate in place by close of business today. We need it in place by the 1st of July. And I'm torn about getting a rate in place and supporting something that I don't totally agree with. There are many elements, like the natural heritage, the moving of the transport into the region. But again, echoing Councillor Marr's comments, we need to get that right because we didn't get it right in our consultation. And so there is a lot of work to do. And quite frankly, I think as councillors, we need to get together and talk about what we want to do and lead the discussion going into the annual plan next year, rather than reacting to a document that's brought forward to us by the Chief Executive. And that's not actually trying to show disrespect. The reality is we need to know that what we're doing reflects the community's aspirations. And I'm very much in favour of that. So being torn, I'm going to support this, and it's very reluctantly, I can assure you, because we need to have this in place. But I'll be working to alter some things in the annual plan going forward. Thank you.
All right, we do have a mover and Councillor Mahuta, and I have seconded this. I would like to say that I'm really pleased with where we've landed on this LTP. We went out with a draft that was the lowest in the entire country. We worked really hard collectively over many, many months. This was not a document that was just put in front of councillors. This was a document that councillors had plenty of opportunity to provide input through various workshops. I believe our first workshop was May of last year, so 13 months of workshopping with this council to ensure that we went out with a document that we felt reflected the needs of our the needs of our community, the concerns, recognized some of the concerns of our community, whether that was affordability or the need to continue to make progress on the things that we are tasked with delivering on behalf of this region. We listened to the feedback we got. We had a fantastic consultation with our community. There was so much positive feedback from various quarters about our level of engagement. And we listened to the feedback. We listened to the feedback with regard to the regional transport rate. And we've said, yeah, neither of those options were acceptable to our community. So we didn't adopt either of those options. We've said we're going to spend the next 12 months, as Councillor Marr has asked, engaging with our TA partners to ensure that we can put something in place that addresses the needs to coordinate our regional transport planning and funding. So I believe that we have listened to our community. We listened when the submissions said that natural heritage partnership rate is important to us, that there is further action that our communities want to see, and that action requires funding to facilitate it. So I believe this council has responded. And we still, as I understand it, are in at least the lower quartile with where we're landing in terms of a rate increase, noting that is an average across the over 500,000 people that we represent by sitting around this table. All right, we have a mover and a seconder. There was a call for division. So I will leave it to you, Democracy Dave.
Thank you very much. So we are voting on the adoption of the long-term plan as per the recommendations set out in the open addendum agenda on page 4. I'll call your names. Can you please indicate using your mics if you support, abstain or oppose the recommendations before us? Councillor Clarkson.
Support.
Councillor Cookson.
Against.
Councillor Downard.
Oppose.
Councillor Dunbar-Smith.
Oppose.
Councillor Graff.
Oppose.
Councillor Hodge. Councillor Hughes.
Oppose.
Councillor Kneebone.
Support.
Councillor Marr.
Support.
Councillor Mahuta.
Support.
Councillor Nicol.
Support.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Story.
Support.
Councillor Strange.
Support.
The motion is carried 9 votes to 5.
Thank you very much to all the staff who've, through, what was it, 18 months? Well done for seeing us through this process. Much appreciated. And also I appreciate the effort that all councillors put into to seeing this process through as well. All right, we now move on to item 10.5. This is the rate setting report. So I'm still in the addendum,
253
right?
in the addendum.
This is 253
In the addendum.
In the
in the addendum, page 253. Yep. Sorry,
Yeah,
Janine.
thank you, Madam Chair. So this report should be taken as a whole in terms of being the rating resolutions that effectively give effect to the long-term plan that you have just adopted. So lots of numbers, lots of rating factors. This is how we actually get the bills out to our community.
All right. Do we have any questions? Councillor Nicol?
Yeah, just happy to move. It's the obvious next step from the previous resolution, which, you know, we have adopted. And I just wanted to mention something, which was the support for what our chair mentioned in the previous resolution of the hard work everyone did to put into this. I just want to make a comment that, you know, the law of averages was mentioned to the right of me by Councillor Smith. And the fact is that not every councillor will be very happy with everything, and that's the nature of council. It's the nature of 14 people coming together. And I think that to vote against the whole, just because you didn't quite get the extreme of what you wanted, is unhelpful when we, as Councillor Smith said, have to strike a rate. So I would recommend that people do follow through with just setting a rate that now is the natural progression of accepting the whole of the decision that was made with the previous resolution and not spending too much time on things like division. Thank you.
Councillor Mahuta?
Happy to second
All right.
for the same
All
reasons.
right, thank you. Thank you, Tippa. So we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, we are now on item 10.6. This is on, so we're back in the regular agenda. 10.6, this is on page 257. The draft Waikato Biodiversity Accord 2024. And we have Alejandro Cifuentes, kia ora, Alejandro, and Angus, sorry.
Kia ora.
You've been in front of this council, I don't know how many times, I don't know why your name just escaped me there.
Too many.
All right, who would like to introduce this? Alejandro.
Kia ora koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Madam Chair and councillors, with me, as you mentioned, I have Angus Mackenzie from Place Group Environmental, who supported us in the development of the Accord. I will keep this introduction very brief, just to mention that the purpose of this item is to seek council approval on the draft Waikato Biodiversity Accord as a foundation document for further engagement and final engagement with the signatories. This follows on from the workshop that council had on the 11th of June, and we presented, as the team presented and briefed the councillors on the draft accord, the contents, and how we got to the point where we're at now. Perhaps I'll just mention additional to what we had. So I prepared a couple slides, but that's essentially just we can skip those in benefit of talking about next steps. The draft is now being refined through further work with iwi partners and stakeholder engagement. So we'll do this over the next couple of months. The lead for this work is Judy Van Rossum, who's our specialist policy advisor for biodiversity. And there will be a work to do with a number of organizations that haven't yet signaled their support. We have many of the ones that are on that list that you see right there that have already signaled that they support the accord. Once the wording has been finalized, the accord will be signed and there will be a format that's more user-friendly, and then we'll have a way to sign the tool. Following on from the accord, staff will work on the development of the regional biodiversity strategy. So that will lay out the long-term vision for biodiversity. That's where a lot of the detail will actually be and how we can contribute to the vision. The strategy is essentially a community and stakeholder-driven plan for restoring biodiversity at a landscape scale. This is a result of direction from the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity. Just for ease of reference, I'll direct you just so you know which documents you'll be looking at when you ask questions. You can find this paper, pages 257 to 269. The draft accord is in pages 261 to 63. There is a companion document that tells you the who, how, when, and what we discussed. Those are pages 264 to 267. And there is a neat little document that shows the key biodiversity issues for the Waikato region on pages 268 and 269. Now, through you, Madam Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any, Councillor Kneebone.
Oh, look, no questions, just particularly noting the stages we're at. Thanks for all your good work. Yeah, happy to move the recommendation, Madam Chair, noting that just purely a step in the process to get a lot of other partners on board here. And I guess it'll come back in due course with potentially a few refinements. So, yeah, yes. So, yeah, I don't really want us to get too carried away with some of the detail, given we've got a whole lot of other feedback to receive.
All right, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. We've discussed this in the workshop, but I'd just like to record my concern that this document was essentially done any real input from councillors until right at the last when we asked for a briefing and an update on what was going on. And I note that it is a requirement under the NPS, Indigenous Biodiversity, so it's something that had to happen anyway. But I would like in future, in such situations, that the views of councillors are sought early on as what the expectations are, so that when staff go out, there is an understanding of what those expectations are. And it may be that, you know, down the line, things need to be modified, but to work in the absence of a council that's been asked to adopt it formally to a long way through the process. So it's just a niggle, I suppose, but I just want it recorded or noted, but happy to support now after the discussion and the workshop to support it. So thank you.
Are you happy to second that? We've got a mover and Councillor Kneebone. Are you happy to second the? All right. No other questions. All those in favor? Opposed? Sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mahuta. Yes, did you have a comment?
Again, yeah, I'm in support of the comments, both my Councillor Smith, but also in support of this because it has been a stop-start process, and in the meantime, SNA has clouded the water. But my question is, how do other willing parties sign on to support the accord, and is there a provision for that should they want to? And I'm thinking of some of our land care groups and other type smaller trusts. Kia ora.
I'll answer that. Kia ora tipa.
Yes, there is definitely provision for other parties to sign on. We've originally targeted those agencies and organisations that have responsibilities directly for biodiversity in a regional sense. So yes, definitely. We want to take it to a wider stakeholder set following this.
Thank you.
All right, we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, last item, councillors. This is item 10.7. On page 270 of your agenda pack, the original, the OG agenda. This is the submission on the Resource Management, Freshwater and Other Matters Amendment Bill 2024. All right, we have Annika.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Annika Hamilton speaking to this item.
Kia ora tātou, ko Annika Hamilton toku ingoa. I'm a policy advisor in the policy implementation team. I also would just like to point out that I've got some other subject matter experts on the line and in the room today. Should you have any specific questions that are on the areas of expertise. So hopefully, online we've got John Palmer, who's a principal technical advisor in the primary industry engagement team. We've got Naomi Crawford, team leader for water policy, and obviously Alejandro Cifuentes, who's just spoken to you. So the Resource Management, Freshwater and Other Matters Amendment Bill was introduced to Parliament last month, and it includes 6 proposed amendments. If Madam Chair is happy for me to do so, I thought what I would do is do a high-level overview of those 6 proposals very briefly and highlight our key submission points.
Great.
So the first proposal in the bill is to exclude the hierarchy of obligations within the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management from resource consent application processes. So consent authorities are required under the RMA to have regard to national policy statements. What this bill does is it amends the requirement and precludes consent authorities from having regard to 2 clauses within the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, and those 2 clauses refer to the hierarchy of obligations within Te Mana Otawai. I'd note that this only applies to consent processes, and we're supportive of it hierarchy continuing to apply to policy and plan processes. The key point in our submission is to seek clarity on how consent authorities to have regard to the remaining provisions that relate to Te Mana Otawai. So we're seeking more clarity there. The second one is around aligning the consenting pathways for coal mining with other extractive activities, mineral extractive activities under national direction. So the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, the National Environmental Standards for Freshwater, and the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity all provide consenting pathways for mineral extraction in and around significant natural areas and wetlands. So what the bill is proposing to do is bring coal mining into line with those consenting pathways. Currently, it's more limited and only applies to the expansion and operation of existing coal mines, but not new coal mines. In our submission, we are encouraging the government to fully consider and assess the impact of the proposal and how this relates to our international obligations. The third proposal in the bill is to amend stock exclusion regulations in relation to low-sloped land. So it revokes all references to low-sloped land in those regulations. And effectively what that means is removing the regulations for the exclusion of beef cattle and deer from lakes and rivers on low-sloped land. And it removes the regulations requiring the exclusion of cattle, deer, pigs from wetlands that are more than 500 square metres, unless they're subject to a couple of exclusions there. So our submission considers that these regulations should remain because whilst farm plans may provide a means of managing the activity responsibly, it considers that they're best supported by a regulatory backstop. But the key point here is just noting that the farm plan system is going through a review and it's really difficult to assess the effectiveness of this whilst we understand that's being reviewed. It's a similar story for the next proposal, which is repealing intensive winter grazing regulations in the National Environmental Standards for Fresh Water. So again, in our submission, we're just noting that the government signalled that the design of the freshwater plan system is likely to change. And until we know what that looks like, it's really difficult to assess and have confidence in whether that's going to be a suitable tool for dealing with this. The next one, so far, bear with me. The Fifth Amendment suspends the National Policy Statement for Indigenous biodiversity requirements for territorial authorities to identify and notify new significant natural areas for 3 years. And again, we're encouraging the government here to undertake a full assessment of this amendment. From what we can see, the assessment's been somewhat limited due to the timeframe. So we are encouraging a fuller assessment of the costs and benefits of this proposal. And then the last one is an amendment to speed up the process to prepare and amend national direction. So national direction being national policy statements and standards. So it proposes to remove what is known as the Board of Inquiry process. So there are currently 2 processes that it can go through. So it's proposing to remove that Board of Inquiry process for a single process, a simpler, streamlined process. And it's proposing to remove the requirement for the government to prepare Section 32 and 32AA evaluation reports. So those are evaluation reports that go with developing those national directions. It introduces a new evaluation report that is somewhat simpler and more streamlined, but it has a lesser criteria to cover. And it also allows the minister to make amendments to national direction in certain circumstances without going through full consultation if it meets a certain set of criteria. So our submission opposes the removal of those Section 32 and Section 32AA evaluations, considering it may be a less robust process and that we consider the assessments of costs and benefits are essential. We're also just cautioning against a process that results in a less effective consultation, highlighting the importance of consultation with local government and cautioning against any unintended consequences there. So that is a full summary. I'm happy to now.
Thank you. Thank you for taking us through those. Councillor Kneebone.
Yeah, no, thanks for this. Look, I think it's a good submission. There's actually a lot in there. It took me quite a while to digest it. And it just strikes me that the costs that are imposed on our council and other councils are quite significant from this, what appears to be not well thought out legislation. And particularly, I note that the one about the Section 32 and 32 AA things, the government giving themselves, I guess, the right to put out new legislation without going through the same sort of rigor as what they ask us to do is it's just wacko. Yeah, it's quite insulting, really. Hey.
Madam Chair, excuse me, sorry, Annika. I'm pleased that matter was picked up by Councillor Kneebone because we have, taking our cue from council feedback to the fast track approval bill, said, okay, how does it impact our council? There's a lot of technical matters, but what are the key issues for us? And the key issue is by the government giving itself some ability to not apply the depth and the rigour for introducing policy. I can see that in speeding up some of their processes, they may well be slowing down some of ours and also creating additional work that we have to do. And further, Annika's alluded a couple of times there to some of these proposals not being well thought out. And we know that some of the proposals are a challenge for Samiwi and Hapu, and from my perspective, that will likely manifest in our processes that we will have to navigate through, that the government no longer has to navigate through with national direction. From a governance perspective, I just don't think that's fair. We are already, on the back of some conversations we've had with council, we are already building a story around in reducing services. What are other government agencies asking us to pick up and saying to us it won't cost any more? Ultimately, there will be a cost. So I'm just making sure that we're raising these issues and asking back to those words, those unintended consequences, that we can't be sure of that our ratepayers may have to capture.
Thank you for that.
So I'm happy to move, Madam Chair, and I just trust that the government will put the time into this submission and what's in there, because otherwise we're going to potentially be doing exactly what they're criticising us for doing half the time.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Mahuta, then Councillor Hughes. Councillor Mahuta.
I'm happy to second the submission. Can you hear me, sorry, Pamela?
Yes.
Oh. So happy to second the submission. I would also like to note in seconding it, the huge amount of effort spent by iwi in this region, working with the RMA to again get to Te Ture Whaimana. It seems like a double bind because again we have to protect Te Ture Whaimana from the review of the same legislation. So happy with what's in the submission, but just note that there will be probably, I anticipate action from River Iwi on this matter as well, should there be any detriment. Kia ora.
Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. If I understand this correctly, what the government is trying to do is to wind back faulty legislation which was passed in 2019, which imposed all sorts of restrictions on farmers, not so much in the Waikato, but more particularly in Southland and the South Island, which were totally unworkable, unreasonable, and acknowledged as being the same, but nobody wanted to do anything about it. So what they're trying to do is to wind that legislation back. And anything that we do to oppose that, I think, is wrong. We should be accepting that these people have been elected to do a job. That's what they're on about. And let them get on with their job and not start to try and flag ourselves as being opposed to anything that's coming out of Wellington, because that's what I see is happening, and I don't support that approach. These people are smart. They've got farmers that have been involved in this process of amending legislation, and they're doing it for a good reason, and that's to support the communities in New Zealand who actually provide the wealth that will allow us to live here. Thank you.
Councillor Clarkson. Oh, sorry. Wait a minute. I've got, sorry, Bruce.
That's
I'm
all
not
right.
sure when Bruce came into the mix. I've got Councillor Marr, then Councillor Nicol, then Councillor Clarkson. Sorry, Councillor Marr.
Thank you, Pamela. With the removal of the hierarchy of obligations for the MPSFM, Tracy, we talk about the potential to draw out the consent process and litigation and that sort of thing. Can you help me understand how that would come about? And you talk of confusion.
Yeah, look, I'll take a first stab and then I'll pass to Annika. The MPS sets national direction. What it's got is the hierarchy of obligations there, being the health and wellbeing of water bodies and ecosystems first. Secondly, the health and needs of people, i.e. drinking water.
Yep.
And then thirdly, the ability of people and communities to provide the social, economic, cultural wellbeing. In saying that it still applies to all the policy development and the policy documents, but not when you are either applying for and assessing a resource consent. There is going to be significant confusion around for the poor people who are applying and assessing their consents. So how there are a raft of things you must assess a consent against. One of those being national policy statements. Cool. Okay. Now the hierarchy of obligations doesn't apply. Then you must go to your regional policy statement and your regional plan, which reflect national direction as stated in national policy documents. So you just smiled. So
that wasn't a light bulb, by the way.
And so it is a dog chasing its tail to a high degree. And I think what it's going to put into the system is an awful lot of litigation that's going to have to go to the Environment Court to determine those things. So which takes primacy, which doesn't take primacy. Similarly, in the Waikato Waipa catchment, we have Te Ture Whaimana anyway, which takes primacy. So does that mean we run into a dual process for 1/3 versus 2/3 of the rest of our region when assessing or applying for consents? So that's the confusion, that in making this change And this is something that the Ministry for the Environment, when they were making changes a few years ago, would make the change and then basically say implement it without any implementation guidance. And that is something that I think every regional council is going to be looking for fairly swiftly if this change goes through. What is the implementation guidance then for people who are going to be applying for consents or not? It will also make things a bit more challenging for, we know there are already a raft of people in the consenting queue for water that will have to be assessed under the legislation that assesses at the time of wherever their consent is at in the process. This kind of now says there's two systems. There's a lot, I understand the intent, but when you start peeling that onion, there is a lot that needs to be clarified for it to work as efficiently as the government is envisaging. That hasn't been done with the haste at which this is put in. That's what we're really highlighting.
So we don't seem to define a suggestion of what would look better in our submission, or what would be more practical for us as a consenting agency, I guess.
So through you, Madam Chair, that could be additional, sorry, Madam Chair, if I can just have a bit of indulgence. So councillors, our chair and our chair of strategy and policy presented to the select committee with our fast track approvals bill. Now the feedback we had is that they were very responsive to the examples we provided. So I guess what I'm hearing from you, Councillor Maher, is if we could provide some of those examples that say, and this is the kind of clarity we're after, probably assist the submission.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Nicol.
Thanks for asking that, Councillor Marcus. I just wanted it clarified as well, but it makes perfect sense. In my previous role as environmental manager, I'd gotten to know that hierarchy when applying for consents, and that's what I needed clarified, because I do recall us putting the MPSFM into the RPS. And so I guess my feedback is great submission. I think that there are topics in it which have been quite political, but the submission itself stays very straight on, our strategic direction, our consistent messages that we're giving to central government all the time, and also very much focuses on the technicalities, the loopholes, the clarifications we need, because to the point, Councillor Hughes was mentioning, I totally get the pragmatism and the intent, as Tracy just said as well. It's the flip-flopping in central government that creates these difficulties in legislation. And so that's what slows things down, because very clear, specific, unambiguous legislation allows things to fly through, yes or no, every gate. Whereas what we've got here is questions and people looking for things to open up litigation, basically, when something might be granted. And so I just want to say thanks to the team. Your expertise shines in here of just saying, we get what you're trying to do, but we need it to work for us. And ultimately, the more we can get central government listening to how local government is trying to implement this, the better. So just really supportive of the submission.
Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of the submission as well. I like the way it's written. I accept the point that Warren's making about giving some examples. I think, though, that overall, when you take the collective number of elements of the submission, in many cases, if the proposed changes do occur, the net effect will actually be for our regional environment to be further degraded. You've only got to pick around in a couple of those examples, like the winter grazing one, and some of the others relating to coal mining. We have to be extremely careful that rushed legislation like this actually doesn't set us back on the track of further degradation of our regional environment. And so that's why I think the way this has been framed, the way it's been written, has tried to take a sort of a neutral approach, but to point out the potential perverse consequences. So I'm fully supportive of it. I think it's a job well done that could be improved by picking a few examples to show how you could fix the proposed change. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the issue I've written down here, submissions don't go far enough with alternatives and for examples. So it's basically picking up what Warren has alluded to, what Bruce has alluded to. I also would like to pick up on an election that took place just over a year ago, or 9 months ago, where the government got a mandate and they went out as part of the parties involved in the current coalition, received a mandate from the electorate to do this stuff because they campaigned on it. And Bruce, you've talked about rush legislation. And while I do not support sticking cows in a paddock and turning it into mud so there's runoff into waterways, that too was hasty legislation that was rushed through to deal with an issue that wasn't being well managed in some areas of the country. So again, I see merits in the submission, but I also see that the government have a mandate to do what they need to do. So I can only support what's here if we provide better examples with that. Otherwise, it's against really what the government has a mandate for. So we've got to remember that they have a mandate. They campaigned on it. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Madam Chair, look, we've taken on board that example approach. The reality is some of this has been pushed through in a compressed time frame as well. So I think that's something that we will work on in terms of when we highlight something, actually put a tandem example in along the way. From what I understand, we're likely to get another change to the RMA before Christmas. So what we will do is start building that cachet of examples when we see the signals that are looking at the provisions likely to change. One example we did put in here, and we will look for some dollars and some figures, is in removing some of the requirements. We're actually gazumping some of our investment, our co-investment that we've made with our landowners to protect some areas. So it's kind of undermining. So we'll talk to some of the guys and see if we can get those examples. If we're unable to get them because this darling needs to be lodged by Sunday, noting the country will probably stop at 5 o'clock today, we will be sure to bring those examples to the fore when we go to the select committee, because I think that's what definitely makes the change there.
Councillor Newbon.
Just to wrap up, if that's right.
Yep.
Just sitting here and I can't believe how similar these conversations are to when we had with the last, like different governments saying, we use the word stuff, but not use the other word, but that's effectively what it feels like. And we spent so much time trying to point out the issues and the loopholes and the faults in the previous government's legislation that was being rushed, and now we're kind of doing it again.
Let's hope that we as a country learn from this process. Wouldn't that be nice? And I suppose that from my point of view, I understand that central government has a mandate. We also have a responsibility as councillors representing the Waikato region. And one of our responsibilities is to provide the insight that we bring with our local knowledge around these proposals that come out of Wellington, because it's all, we all know that that we write things and we think that they're the best thing since sliced bread. Sometimes it's that ground truthing, and that's what we provide as Waikato Regional Council. We provide that feedback, and as has been raised on a number of occasions, it's the unfunded mandate that lands on our lap and lands in the lap of our ratepayers, and that's what we're trying to provide some insight for this government on, is how their proposals will land for our ratepayers. So with that, I've got a mover and a seconder, and there have been some suggested alterations, so we will take those into account, and those will be signed off by myself and Director May prior to the lodgement on Sunday.
Well, today.
Today. Yes, we'll make quick work of it. All right. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Well done. Thank you, Annika, for your presentation and your report and your work that went into preparing that. All right, counselors. So that brings us to the end of not only our agenda, but in terms of this council, the end of our financial year. And so I just wanted to remind everybody of that we've been through our last 12 months, and I have Karen Bennett has provided me with a fantastic overview of all of the things that have been accomplished in regard to our strategic priorities. And I won't go through all of them, but just highlighting the number of submissions we've made to central government, including the one we've just done today. I believe we've had I've got 10 down here, so I don't know if today makes 11, but as well as all of the submissions that we've made to other authorities planning documents. As we have adopted today, we've set our 2024-2034 long-term plan, and our rates increases remain in the lower end of those proposed by the sector. I remind councillors that we went through the Te Korowai Council Mark assessment to look at the ways we might improve our efficiency and effectiveness as a council. And we look forward to seeing the action plans that fall out of that. I note for councillors the Kauri Protection VR project. Many of you will be familiar with that and have seen it at field days. That, of course, received the Eagle Technology Local and Central Government Award at the 2024 Biosecurity Awards, and also was a finalist in the Taitura Local Government Excellence Awards. We continue our efforts in terms of the regional response to corbicula and golden clam, or / golden clam, it's just one clam, as well as the Calurpa response. We have appointed a hearings panel for the proposed regional coastal plan, including Councillor Marr and Councillor Nebo, and so we look forward to that progressing its way through. I note the $6.2 million Churchill East Pump Station commission, the second of council's pump stations to utilize the fish-friendly enclosed Archimedes screw pump. And also note the 99% of tuna that passed safely through the trial of the new modified McEwen's fish-friendly pump design, a great illustration of how we can look at how we make our assets friendly to our native fauna, as well as serving the community's needs. There has been fantastic progress in public transport, and our regional bus service patronage has returned to pre-COVID levels with around 3.5 million trips over this year. And our higher frequency buses in Hamilton, the Orbiter, Meteor, and Comet now make up 66% of all city bus patronage, reflecting that value in frequency and reliability in encouraging a change to our travel habits. I also note the continuation of the NZTA board funding for Tahuya through the end of its 5-year trial. Today, we adopted RLTP, such a great piece of work that came out of the Regional Transport Committee and required some focus and nimble response, particularly made more complex with the national election results that led to a very late release of the government policy statement on land transport. So congratulations to everybody that was involved in delivering that. We note the continued growth of the community transport programs, and that all grant funding for the 2023-24 year was fully allocated, and we're seeing fantastic feedback from our communities as to how important those endeavors are in connecting up our communities. We also accomplished the regional energy inventory, and again in May adopted the new framework, the Ta'aki Turoa Nature Plus framework to help us offset those hard to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in our public transport space. So just wanted to run through a few, but I believe that Karen is going to put forward a report for council just so that councilors can be aware of the trajectory of how we are making movements forward in achieving our strategic priorities and the plans that we have put in place at the start of this triennium. So just wanted to highlight that for councilors as we go into our council recess for the next 3 weeks. I hope that everybody has some time to spend with their friends and their family. I hope you enjoy some time connecting with your community and reflecting on the positive impact that this council has had on our community over the last 12 months. So with that, we will close with a karakia.
Thank you, Chair, and just want to also acknowledge the work that councillors have put in to helping us get to some pretty big milestones on the agenda today.
Yes.
So just close with the karakia. Unahia mai te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te hinanaru, e te ara takatu, koe rā e rongo, e whakāria aki ki runga, kia tina, humiei, huiei, taekie.
Thank you very much, everybody. We'll declare the meeting closed at 12:30 p.m.